Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my honourable friend rightly raises the need for research into frontier AI safety, and I welcome the government's commitment to protecting the public from future AI risks. But AI affects all our lives already. Today, my Select Committee launches an inquiry into algorithms, AI and their role in spreading online harm, as we saw in the terrible riots over the summer. As we build our evidence, how is he building the evidence base on AI, online harms and their social impact right now?
I'm extremely grateful to the Chair of the Select Committee for choosing this as her first inquiry. It's an incredibly important area. This government is committed to the algorithmic transparency recording standard. The previous government reneged on its commitment to have individual departments releasing their standard statement each year. This government is committed to doing so again and will remain committed to reinforcing the fact that algorithms are there to serve people, not the other way around.
Jim Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Minister very much for that response. Minister, there are many firms in Northern Ireland who have the capability, the experience, to be able to offer some advice in relation to achieving scientific research on AI safety. Has the Minister had I know he's very interested in Northern Ireland. Has the Minister had an opportunity to speak to the companies in Northern Ireland so we can play our part and how we take this forward? Thank you.
I'm very grateful for the honourable gentleman's comment, and also reflecting the fact that acknowledging the interest that I have in Northern Ireland. I visited Northern Ireland already since being appointed to meet some of the pioneering tech companies that are there. I will stay committed to making sure that this government recognises the talent that is across Northern Ireland, harnessing it for not just the domestic good, but the global good too.
Alex Baker.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the UK's rollout of 5G has been far too slow. According to OpenSignal, the UK ranks 22nd out of 25 European countries for 5G download speeds and availability after 14 years of Conservative rule. We're determined to change that, aiming to have higher quality standalone 5G in all populated areas by 2030.
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Access to 5G data is a real issue in Aldershot. According to Ofcom, a third of our households cannot connect to 5G, nearly 3 times the national average. What is the government doing to give residents in Aldershot and Farnborough the same data access as the rest of the country? And will the Minister make this work a priority?
She's absolutely right. It has to be a priority, both for businesses, for families, for everybody engaged in her constituency, but it also for public sector. We want the MOD, for instance, in her constituency to be able to have the highest quality data access possible so that we can deliver a more effective government, a more productive government across the whole of the United Kingdom, and this will indeed be a priority for us.
Ben Way.
There's been great improvements to connectivity across Ceredigion, Preseli, but there remain total mobile hotspots such as Porthgain and a growing body of evidence collected locally that the connectivity reported by Ofcom doesn't quite stack up with the lived experience on the ground. Would the Minister care to meet with me so that I can present some of this evidence collected by local authorities in Ceredigion and Preseli to see how we can address this problem?
Well, he's just said what I said a few minutes ago, which is great to see that Plaid Cymru are signing up to the Labour Party's agenda these days. But what is upsetting is that he forgot to mention that we've only recently had 7 more high-quality masts extending better coverage of 4G in Wales specifically, only in the last couple of months. But of course I'm happy to meet with him, and I'm very happy to place in a copy in the library of the letter that I've had from Ofcom that makes the very precise point that we need to do much better in recognising the real experience of people's mobile connectivity rather than the theoretical, ethereal version.
Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 8, sir.
Mr. Speaker, there are over 30 Project Gigabit contracts currently in place with a total value of almost £2 billion and more in the pipeline. In the past few months, the first premises have been connected as part of Project Gigabit contracts in areas including Norfolk, West Yorkshire and South Wiltshire, and the build has now started in earnest in other parts of the country as well.
Sean Davies.
Speaker, I welcome the progress this government is making on the rollout of Gigabit to all corners of the country, but in Telford, the inequality remains stark, with some wards having complete Gigabit coverage, but areas like the World Heritage Site in Iron Bridge having almost none. Can the government confirm, as part of its agenda to break down the barriers of opportunity, that includes residents and businesses and World Heritage Sites that cannot get online?
Well, the World Heritage aspects of Ironbridge relate to my DCMS responsibilities, but he's absolutely right about Ironbridge, and I very much hope that we will be able to announce something very shortly in relation to extending gigabit coverage through a procurement via Openreach in his constituency.
Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware that there's a really strong link between communication technology and the rollout of smart meter technology, and in areas in the North Scotland that are suffering cold weather, particularly at the moment, that connectivity is really important for those alternative technologies to work. What discussions has he had with the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero on that issue?
He's absolutely right. There are a whole series of issues about the security and safety of connectivity in areas which suffer particular weather conditions. We had a very successful summit on Monday morning to discuss the closing down of the PSTN network to make sure that everybody's going to be secure. But I can also assure him that we will work very closely with the Scottish Government to make sure that the rollout in all of these areas works for the interests of businesses, whatever the weather conditions.
We come to Topicals, Dr. Becky Cooper.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To protect people online, today I became the first Secretary of State to exercise the power to set out my strategic online safety proposals for Ofcom to consider. From increasing transparency to baking safety into social media platforms from the outset, these priorities will support government to monitor progress to act where our laws are coming up short. I've also launched a new research project to explore the impact of social media on young people's well-being and their mental health.
Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Each year, millions of patients in England attend 2 or more different hospital trusts. Most of the trusts that commonly see the same patients do not use the same record systems. What steps is the Minister now taking with Cabinet colleagues to utilise the Centre for Data Collaboration and other available technology to improve data sharing across NHS hospital trusts?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What a pleasure it is to speak to another Labour MP from Sussex from the dispatch box. This is a Department of Health responsibility, but on their behalf, in the the Data Use and Access Bill will include a requirement that IT providers in the NHS have to meet information standards. This will deliver the interoperability that is needed so that data can be shared across the NHS, often for the very first time.
Shadow Minister on the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we're proud that it was the last Conservative government that created the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and I'm glad Labour are following our agenda, and I look forward to my exchanges with the Secretary of State. Mr. Speaker, under the last Conservative government, Britain was home to more billion-dollar tech startups than France and Germany combined. But last month, an industry survey found that nearly 90% of tech founders would consider leaving Britain if Labour raised taxes on tech businesses. Yesterday, Labour U-turned on policy in Scotland. So today, will the Secretary of State commit to reversing Labour's jobs tax, which damages tech businesses across the entire country, Mr. Speaker?
Can I welcome the honourable gentleman to his post? We worked together on the 4th Industrial Revolution all-party group, which he chaired, and I look forward to having a constructive relationship going forward. He mentioned the last Labour government. I think the way they're going on, it would have been the last Labour government that we see. But to be honest, the circumstances that businesses have asked for, large and small, operating in the tech landscape, a smooth regulatory process. We have delivered regulatory reform already. Reform to planning. We've delivered the reform to the planning system. A stable financial settlement. We have delivered that with a budget forward.
Please, it's Topicals. And we'll see a very good example from the Shadow Secretary of State, Alan Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for his kind words, but he has punished Labour, and figures from his own department show that workers will be losing out by nearly £800 per worker per year as a result of Labour's budget. So will he stand up to the Chancellor and oppose any further tax rises on Britain's hard-working tech sector?
The budget gave a pay rise for working people in this country and set the conditions for a stable economy, fixing the black hole that was left in our economy by mismanagement of this government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I was at London City Airport's STEM event, which brought together 500 students from secondary schools across East London. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that if we're going to have thriving STEM industries, we need more engagement events like this?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Outside the classroom, the Cyber First programme has engaged 250,000 young people across the UK. This is the first steps. This government will be going further.
Well, Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, Mr. Speaker, recently I hosted a briefing event for the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, where strong evidence was presented that almost all drug research and research into other products could be done without abusing animals. So will the Secretary of State take up the opportunity to actually make sure that we no longer experiment on animals and actually use other methods to get products into service?
I'm really grateful for the question from the honourable gentleman. The first job I ever had was at the Body Shop working for Anita Roddick and joined her campaign against animal testing for cosmetics. She would be very proud to see me at the dispatch box engaging in this conversation at the moment. A manifesto commitment for this party, the Labour Party in government, is to phase out into the long-term use of animal testing. That is something we're committed to. It's something we're taking steps towards.
In Lavery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The peddling of fake news and disinformation on social media platforms is fueling extremism. It's also impacting heavily on the democratic processes we have in the UK. Can the Minister say what safeguards is being taken by the government to combat this really serious issue?
I'm extremely grateful for the honourable gentleman raising one of the most serious issues of our time. The Online Safety Act requires providers to specifically consider how algorithms will impact a user's exposure to illegal content and the children's exposure to content that is harmful to children as part of their risk assessment. I have introduced new measures to make sure that children are kept safe. Today I issued a statement of strategic priority to Ofcom to insist that they continue to do so into the future.
Sir David Davis, final question.
Mr. Speaker, last year nearly 50 British universities were identified as having research ties with what were deemed to be very high-risk Chinese institutions. Subsequently, the intelligence services briefed 24 universities on resisting the infiltration attempts of foreign agencies, but the Intelligence and Security Committee report says that it's highly likely that joint UK-China research projects are used for military purposes. What is the department doing to protect both our research and our security?
I'm grateful for the question. This government is working closely both with individual universities, the university sector and our intelligence community to make sure that our research is world-class but is also safe and secure.
Right, we now come to questions to the Deputy Prime Minister, Belrabira Ade.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
I've been asked to reply. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has attended the G20 summit, strengthening the UK's ties with major economies to drive jobs and security at home. And Mr. Speaker, this week marks 1,000 days of Putin's barbaric war in Ukraine. We will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. And Mr. Speaker, this week also marks Equal Pay Day. I am extremely proud that this government has introduced the Employment Rights Bill, strengthening the rights of working women and making work pay. And Mr. Speaker, this morning I will have meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in the House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met with members of the British Association for Biological Anthropology and Osteoarchaeology, who highlighted a loophole in the Human Tissues Act which allows human remains to be auctioned, frequently disguised as modified items or replicas. This has included a fetal skeleton posed under a glass dome, a human thigh bone turned into a cane, a human jawbone necklace, and the varnished skull of a 6-year-old, often from indigenous communities in Africa and Asia stolen during colonial expeditions. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that it is an abhorrent for human remains, regardless of their origin or age, to be sold by auction houses and on social media sites like Instagram, Facebook, eBay, Etsy and Gumtree? And will the government take action to end this depraved practice?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this sensitive issue, and it's absolutely horrifying to hear the account of what my honourable friend mentions, and I absolutely agree that that's abhorrent. And while the Human Tissue Authority strictly regulates the public display of human remains with fines or imprisonment for breaches, it does not cover sales or purchases. However, I will ensure that a meeting is made with the appropriate minister to discuss the troubling cases that she raises.
We now come to Alex Burkhardt, the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Very happy to associate myself and this side of the House with the remarks the Right Honourable Lady made about Ukraine. Democracies must stand together. What is the government doing to bring down inflation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's astonishing that, and first of all, can I welcome the Right Honourable Member to his place? And many people might not know, Mr. Speaker, but the Honourable Member was the Minister for Growth when, under Liz Truss, inflation was 11.1% and growth flatlines, so we're doing much better than he did.
Well, the truth is that this, well, actually, thanks to I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for her standard charm. The truth is, this government isn't doing anything to bring down inflation. This government is stoking inflation. First, we had above-inflation pay rises for the unions. Then, we had a budget which the OBR said would increase inflation.
Order. Sorry. Right, I'm going to hear the question. I suggest we all hear it together, then our constituents can understand the answer as well as the question. Alex Burke.
Very kind, Mr. Speaker. First, we had above-inflation pay rises for the unions. Then, we had a budget which the OBR said was going to push up inflation. This morning, we had city economists, real economists, Mr. Speaker, saying that next year inflation would hit 3%. Does the Right Honourable Lady agree that this government's decisions mean higher inflation for working people?
Mr. Speaker, I'll ask the honourable gentleman, 11.1% or 3%?
We've already talked about Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. It was Ukraine and COVID that drove up inflation. This government is doing it to the British people. High tax, high inflation, low growth, low reform. There's a word for that, Mr. Speaker. It's Starmerism. Yesterday, like many honourable members on this side of the House, I spoke to farmers from across the United Kingdom. Some of them families who farmed their land for centuries, elderly men in tears, children worried about their parents, all of them worried that their way of life is about to be destroyed. What would the Right Honourable Lady like to say to them?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely committed to our British farmers, and that's why we've committed £5 billion to the farming budget over the next 2 years. That's the largest ever amount for sustainable food production in the UK. And it's alongside £60 million, Mr. Speaker, to support those affected by extreme wet weather and over £200 million to tackle disease outbreaks. His party couldn't even get the money out the door for farmers, failing to spend over £300 million on farming budgets. The farmers know they ruined it for them, and that's why we're in government and they're not.
Well, perhaps the Right Honourable Lady thinks that everyone came to London yesterday to thank the government. Let's look at the facts. A typical mid-sized 360-acre family farm in the constituency of my Right Honourable friend for Thirsk and Moulton. They've spoken to their accountant. Their new liability because of this government is £500,000. That's 12 years' worth of profit. When this generation passes away, that farm will become totally unviable, and it's just one of thousands and thousands of similar farms. It's clear the government hasn't got its facts right. The Central Association for Agricultural Valuers, the real experts in this field, say so. The NFU says so. They're shortly to publish a report showing that 75% of all commercial farms will fall above the threshold. If the government isn't going to reverse this terrible policy, will the Right Honourable Lady at least commit that there will be no further increases to inheritance tax and no further reductions to agricultural property relief or business property relief in this Parliament?
Well, Mr Speaker, he talks about the facts, and I absolutely stand by the figures the government has set out. And the vast majority of estate owners will be totally unaffected. He wants to talk about the figures, Mr Speaker. I will be crystal clear. The vast majority of estate owners will see no change and pay no tax on land passed on valued at £1 million. Couples can pass on £3 million, Mr Speaker, tax-free, and those above the thresholds will pay only half the normal rate and can pay over 10 years interest-free.
This is just another part of the budget that's unravelling, Mr Speaker. Everyone here and all the farmers at home will have heard there was no guarantee there. We know what that means. They're coming back for more. And even if the Honourable Lady had made a promise today, it wouldn't have been worth a fig. We know that the Environment Secretary, before the election, promised the farmers this wouldn't happen. Labour promises get broken. Let's put all of this into context. The Treasury says the family farms tax will raise, on average, £441 million a year. The Treasury also says that the public sector pay rises the government announced in July will cost £9.4 billion a year. That's over 21 times as much. Why does the government think that above-inflation pay rises for the trade unions are worth so...
Order! Now then, I don't need any more from the second bench. Can I just say, please, less of it. We've had a bit of a run-in recently and I don't need to have any more. Right. Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think it's an audacity for the honourable gentleman to stand there and suggest in some way that Labour broke promises or raised taxes. When I'll school the honourable gentleman, it was his government that raised taxes to the highest level for a generation. It was his government.
Sorry? We'll have less as well, unless you want to go and have a cup of tea. Have we heard any more? Is that it now? Yes or no? Absolutely, you're the one that was mouthing. Well, I'm sorry, you must be able to do it like a ventriloquist dummy. Prime Minister.
It was his government that crashed the economy, that saw inflation rise to 1.1% and growth flatline. It was his government that spent the reserves 3 times over. I'll take no lessons from the honourable gentleman.
Alex Burkhardt.
I understand why the Right Honourable Lady doesn't want to answer questions about the terrible choices the government have made. It's because the truth is ugly. The truth is that this is a punishment meted out to people who don't vote Labour. It's the same punishment meted out to parents who send their children to private schools. It's the same punishment meted out to the owners of small businesses terrified about national insurance contributions. And it's the same punishment meted out to pensioners who can't afford to pay their fuel this winter. Isn't it the truth, Mr Speaker, that if you don't vote Labour, they don't care about you?
There will be more, and it won't be what you want more of. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, after that display, he clearly didn't recognise the result of the general election. And has learnt nothing. While this government has been fixing the mess that they left, the Conservatives have been desperately trying to rewrite history. They come here every week, jumping on a new bandwagon, taking a new pot shot, but absolutely no word on what they'll do differently. Last week, the Leader of the Opposition admitted she supported Labour's plans to invest in NHS, schools and homes. But what they want is all the benefits of the budget, Mr Speaker, but have no idea how they'll pay for it. Mr Speaker, the faces may change, but it's the same old Tory party. Straight back to putting everything on their credit card, spending their reserves 3 times over. We took the difficult decisions to fix the £22 billion black hole that they left behind, and while they're reinventing the past, we're investing in the future.
Andy MacDonald. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a new report, Human Rights Watch have set out irrefutably how Israeli authorities are committing the war crimes of forcible transfer in Gaza, which amounts to crimes against humanity. Israel's evacuation system fails to ensure civilian safety. Civilians are not provided with access to health, nutrition and shelter, compounded by the banning of UNRWA, with much of Gaza now uninhabitable. Will the government acknowledge that Israel has carried out mass forced displacement in Gaza, and will it take concrete measures on arms trade and Israeli officials in order to comply with its duty to prevent genocide and protect Palestinian lives?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The situation in the Middle East is catastrophic, and I know the whole House is horrified at the terrible loss of civilian life. We are calling at every opportunity for an immediate ceasefire with the release of the hostages and more aid into Gaza. But we do urge Israel to ensure that UNRWA can continue its life-saving work, something the Foreign Secretary has discussed directly with the Israeli Foreign Minister. And we've imposed sanctions in response to appalling incidents of settler violence and suspended export licences for arms following a review that found a clear risk that they may be used to commit or facilitate violations of international law. And we will continue to seek to a two-state solution with a secure Israel, Mr Speaker, alongside a viable and sovereign Palestine.
Come to Daisy Cooper, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I associate myself and the Liberal Democrats with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks on Ukraine. Ahead of the budget, I warned the Deputy Prime Minister that increasing national insurance contributions on social care providers would make the crisis in social care worse. Now, OBR figures suggest that the increase in NICs will cost more to social care providers than the money that the government has announced for that sector in the budget, meaning that that measure alone could withdraw £200 million out of the sector. Will the Deputy Prime Minister speak with the Chancellor to make sure that, at the very least, health and care providers are protected from taking the hit?
Well, I thank the honourable member for that question, and the Chancellor is sat near me, and I know that through those discussions that we had, that we wanted to ensure that we protected social care. That's why we confirmed £600 million of new grant funding for social care next year, Mr Speaker, an uplift to local government spending and an £86 million increase to the Disabled Facilities Grant. Our Employment Rights Bill will help deliver the first ever fair pay agreement for social care sector as well, and we'll also make sure that the NHS is funded to help with the social care situation as well.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's clear that the social care providers will be worse off, so I do urge the Deputy Prime Minister and the Chancellor to look again at that. Somebody else who was very worried about the budget is Cathy. Cathy is a farmer in my constituency of St Albans, and she told me yesterday that she thinks the government changes simply do not make sense. The changes mean that her family may have to pay a bill which will force them to sell land, which makes food production unviable. At the same time, the government has not closed the land-buying tax loophole that can be exploited by equity firms and the super wealthy. Farmers told me yesterday that they feel like they were betrayed by the Conservatives, and they now feel they were betrayed by the Conservatives. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Farmers told me yesterday that they feel as though they had been betrayed by the Conservatives, but they now feel like they have also been lied to by Labour. Will the Deputy Prime Minister think again on this measure so that our farmers can feed Britain?
Well, again, Mr Speaker, I'm sorry to hear that Cathy is distressed by what I would say is scaremongering around what the Labour Party is doing. The budget delivered £5 billion for farming over the next 2 years, a record amount. The last government failed to spend £300 million on farmers, and our plan is sensible, fair and proportionate and protects the smaller estates while fixing public services that they rely on.
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are only 7 places in England, according to the House Library, where school funding per pupil is lower than my constituency of Aldershot and Farnborough. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that something has gone badly wrong when teachers are being forced to pay out of their own pocket for basic school supplies, and so many others have left the profession in droves over the past 14 years?
14 years.
Will ministers work with me to tackle the root of this problem so that we can give every young person in my constituency and beyond the very best start in life?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And every child deserves the opportunity to succeed in school and beyond. And I'm sorry to hear of the experience in her constituency. Last week I visited Raisingfield Primary School in my constituency, whose school council had a lot to say about the resources to our schools, and we have increased the core schools budget by £2.3 billion next year, increasing per pupil funding in real terms. And as her constituency, home of the British Army, I know she will also welcome the expansion of childcare support to service families deployed overseas, saving families around £3,400 a year. And I'm happy to ensure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just a few weeks ago from that dispatch box, the Minister for Rural Affairs said that he'd been congratulated by a farmer over the introduction of the inheritance tax. Now, I think this farmer must have been a cannabis farmer, because just yesterday we had 10,000 farmers on Whitehall protesting against this madcap decision. So does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that this decision should be thrown in the trash can along with Rachel from Accounts' CV?
Well, Mr Speaker, he talks about CVs. It's good to see the honourable member doing well on his bench, once a Labour councillor, then a Tory MP, and now a Reform Chief Whip. Every time he switches party, he gets a promotion. Mr Speaker, I've already outlined what we've done to support our farmers, and we'll continue to support the farmers, and we'll continue to invest in our public services to get Britain back on track.
Graham Stringer.
My right honourable friend has come under intense scrutiny from the press at different times. She must have found it very difficult. A press free to scrutinise politicians is absolutely vital in a free society and a democracy. Is she as concerned as I am about the Stasi-like interview that was given to Alison Pearson, the Daily Telegraph journalist, a week last Sunday? And does she agree with me that the Essex Police Force and other police forces would be better trying to deal with shoplifting, burglaries and other crimes rather than intimidating journalists?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. And also, it is incredibly important around free speech and our press. It's part of our democracy. But it's also in direct response to his question. Of course, police are independent and it's a live investigation, and therefore it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on that. But I do believe that we should have a free press. It's part of our democracy, and we should have free speech. But with that comes responsibility of those that do it.
So keep that.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yesterday I met with 3 constituents in Parliament, Duncan Hawley, his wife Nicola and his 10-year-old daughter Hattie. Duncan is a sheep farmer and he's stewarded his family farm for most of his life. He's outraged and hurt and worried about the government's deeply damaging family farm tax. And he's deeply worried about food security, food inflation and whether we'll even be able to pass that farm on to future generations. So my question to the Deputy Prime Minister is very simple. Why has this Labour government declared war on British farmers?
Well, I say to the honourable member and to Duncan and Nicola that This government hasn't declared war on farmers. The vast majority of farms will not pay any inheritance tax, and we have protected them. We have been as generous as we can, and the farmers rely on our public services like everybody else. We inherited a £22 billion black hole from the Conservatives, who spent reserves 3 times over. We are investing in our schools, our hospitals, our public services and housing. And if the honourable gentleman wants to suggest what he would do differently, if he doesn't agree with that, like the Leader of the Opposition, then he should say so.
Dr. Samuel.
Mr. Speaker, the previous government failed countless women through chronic underfunding of maternity services. At Stroud Maternity Hospital, postnatal beds have remained closed for over 2 years. Local midwife-led units like Stroud deliver fantastic quality of care for women whilst having really low intervention rates during birth. Can the Deputy Prime Minister outline what steps this government will take to improve maternity services?
Yes. Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question. I'm sorry to hear about the situation in Stroud, and I thank him for raising this important issue for women in his constituency. The Darcy report clearly set out that under the previous government, the NHS was broken, with patients waiting too long for care. We're committed to ensuring that all women and babies receive safe, compassionate and personalised care through pregnancy, birth and, critically, following those months ahead. We will ensure maternity services deliver the best outcomes for patients as we invest to build an NHS fit for the future.
Samuel Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Lefarydd. Now, I know how much professional care work means to the Deputy Prime Minister. Cariad care homes in Porthmadog tell me they won't be able to absorb the additional exorbitant costs imposed by her government's budget. They tell me they believe this poses a threat worse than COVID to their business. Wow. Will she personally intervene, therefore, so that her government at least makes care providers exempt from the rise in employers' national insurance contributions?
Well, she's absolutely right to say that I absolutely value the work of care providers and carers across the whole of the UK, and that's why we've put additional funding in through the budget as well. And we've also been making sure that care providers and those that work in the charities, including hospices, amongst the tax regime provides the most generous amongst in the world, Mr. Speaker. This includes tax release for charities and their donors worth over £6 billion for the tax year of April 2024. We put record funding into our NHS. We've increased funding into adult social care and children's social care, and will continue to support our public services that were left on their knees by the last government.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago today, the Chancellor announced a historic £22.6 billion investment into the NHS because it is our duty to rescue this country's health service after 14 years, sadly, of mismanagement, underinvestment and, unfortunately, also misleading announcements from the party opposite. In Plymouth, Derriford Hospital, where I represent, serves not just my constituency, but 19 constituencies across the South West. It is the only major trauma centre for adults in the South West. However, we have really suffered from those decisions from the Conservatives. Can the Deputy Prime Minister outline how that historic investment is going to make its way to Plymouth?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for being such a champion for Plymouth, and as he knows, we're providing £25 billion extra over the next 2 years from the Department for Health and Social Care, including the largest capital budget in real terms since 2010, and we'll make sure that every corner of the UK can see the generosity and how that will improve services for them. And I'll make sure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss in detail how Plymouth will be able to capitalise off that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The town of Cheshunt in my constituency of Broxbourne has no banks or building societies. We've been told we're not eligible for a banking hub. We've been told we're not eligible for a banking hub. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that every town that wants a banking hub should be eligible for one so that my residents can have access to their hard-earned cash?
Well, Mr Speaker, we've committed to 350 banking hubs through this Parliament, and I'm sure the Minister will be happy to meet with him on that point. But I'm also hopeful that he also will be thankful of the Levelling Up Fund Round 2 money that we secured, with £14.3 million going to Waltham Cross Resistance Project, regenerating the town centre for his constituents.
Jonathan Hinder.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know better than most that under the last Tory government, neighbourhood policing was stripped away, leaving the police invisible in towns like those I represent in Pendle and Clitheroe. As a former police inspector, I'm delighted that the new Labour government has committed to rebuild neighbourhood policing. Yeah. Can the Deputy Prime Minister assure my constituents that Labour's neighbourhood policing guarantee will soon ensure that every town has a dedicated neighbourhood team? Yeah.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank him for his expertise in this area and for the work that he did previous to coming to this place. Tory austerity has decimated neighbourhood policing, and we'll put thousands more neighbourhood police and PCSOs back on our streets to ensure every community has a named local officer, and we'll tackle illegal drugs, half-night crime, crack down on antisocial behaviour and go after the gangs who lure young people into violence.
Dr. Andrew Burris.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Scottish and Welsh governments have banned the construction of new waste incinerators because of health and pollution concerns. The last government paused them and committed to banning them. Why then is this government busy approving them?
Well, Mr Speaker, planning, as the honourable gentleman knows, we always follow the strict rules in regard to that, making sure that safety and other factors are always taken into consideration, and will continue to do so.
Yuan Yang.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thousands of families in my constituency of Early and Woodley have moved into new build developments in Shinfield, in Loddon Park and beyond. But many have found their dreams of home ownership punctured by unfair and opaque property management charges. Can the Deputy Prime Minister reassure my constituents by setting out how the Leasehold Reform Bill will address these concerns? And would she like to meet with me and affected constituents?
Well, I welcome my honourable friend to her place. Unjustified increases in service charges are completely unacceptable, Mr Speaker. The Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act will provide homeowners with greater rights, powers and protections over their homes, and that includes greater transparency over service charges. For too long, leaseholders have been ripped off. It's this government that will sort it out.
Fan of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Today is Red Wednesday, in which we remember all those persecuted for their belief worldwide. A recent report by Aid to the Church in Need shows that in the countries surveyed, persecution of minorities has increased by 60%. In the light of this, will the government commit to reappointing the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief, a post that has remained vacant since July, and do that as soon as possible, hopefully by Christmas, so that we in the United Kingdom can play our part in defending religious and belief minorities worldwide?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We are committed to champion human rights, including the right to freedom of religion or belief. I join the right honourable member in marking Red Wednesday, an important moment to show support for all those persecuted around the world for their religion or belief. And today we'll light up the FCDO buildings in the UK in red in support of that, Mr Speaker. Envoy roles are under consideration, will be decided upon in due course.
Lee Burrow.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Harshita Brella was killed and found in the boot of her car as it was taken from her home in Corby on the 14th of November. This tragic murder left the community shocked and scared and is being investigated by the police. Harshita was protected by a domestic violence order that lasted 28 days. It was not renewed. Would the Deputy Prime Minister agree that all must be done to reassure the community and to bring the perpetrator to justice? And would she further agree that in some circumstances, domestic abuse orders should last longer than 28 days when the victims are most vulnerable?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this case, Mr Speaker. Hajita's family, my thoughts are with her family in this horrifying set of circumstances where Hajita should have been protected and felt protected. This government is committed to halving violence against women and girls, Mr Speaker, and we continue to do our work, hopefully across this House, to make sure that we can end circumstances where Hajita faced and we can stop this kind of barbaric action.
Lincolnshire.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Spelthorne Litter Pickers are an outstanding organisation of 1,000 volunteers who do great work up and down my constituency, come rain or shine. And last week, they were awarded the King's Award for Voluntary Service. Would the Deputy Prime Minister, the Government, indeed the whole House, like to join me in congratulating the Spelthorne Litter Pickers and to thank them for all that they do?
What can I say? I absolutely agree with the honourable may I say my honourable friend in terms of the Spelthorne litter pickers, and say what an important role across all of our constituencies where local communities come together and volunteers help, in particular young people as well do a lot of this in our constituencies, Mr Speaker. So I think across the whole House we congratulate them on their award and those that do the voluntary work and support our community.
Well, Barker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I draw the House's attention to my register of interest as a very proud trade union member. In 2019, the party opposite promised to deliver an employment bill that would protect and enhance workers' rights in the UK, and like so many of their promises, they never delivered. But my right honourable friend has done it. Cleaning up the mess that the party opposite left behind. So would the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that her employment rights bill is the biggest upgrade to workers in a generation?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And declaring an interest, me and my right honourable friend used to be conveners for Unison North West as well, and I champion the work that she's done on behalf of her constituents and for working people of this country. The government is delivering on its plan to make work pay and to ensure that employment rights are fit for a modern economy. And the Employment Rights Bill will benefit people in some of the most deprived areas of the country and will save them up to £600 per year in lost income from hidden costs of insecure work. So I commend the work that many honourable members, some across the House and in particular on our benches, that have brought this bill to fruition.
Reb Stewart.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The whole House recognises the authenticity of the Right Honourable Lady's backstory, her pride in being a carer, and indeed in her recent elevation. By contrast, in June, the Chief Constable of Northamptonshire was sacked for misrepresenting his CV. And just last month, Tanya Nasri, the nurse, was imprisoned for 5 years for doing the same. Does the Right Honourable Lady agree with me that such serious consequences are right and just in such cases?
Well, Mr Speaker, what I would say to the honourable gentleman, I know where he's trying to go with this, but while it's tempting, what I would say to the honourable gentleman is, the right honourable gentleman, I do apologise. What I would say to the right honourable gentleman is our Chancellor in the last 4 months has shown more competence than the last 4 Chancellors that he had.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My home city of Edinburgh, despite being Scotland's capital, is the lowest funded per head local authority in Scotland, due to austerity inflicted on us by the SNP in Holyrood. That means great projects like the Ripple face closure. Now that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Scotland, has secured the biggest block grant to Scotland in the history of the Scottish Parliament, will the Deputy Prime Minister work with me to ensure the Scottish Government uses that to end austerity for my constituents?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. He's entirely right to raise the impact of SNP's irresponsible management of Scotland's finances and the austerity that they're inflicting on his constituents. Our budget rejected a return to austerity, and we delivered the largest funding settlement for Scotland in real terms since devolution. The result of the budget is clear, Mr Speaker. The SNP have the powers, they have the money, they have no more excuses.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I was contacted last week by a constituent whose husband has stage 4 bowel cancer. He had a routine scan in June but didn't receive the results until early November. And unfortunately, within that period, he received unsuitable chemotherapy and his cancer has progressed. Given that Shropshire has the worst record in the country for CT and MRI scan results, can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister the same question that my constituent has asked me? When is the government going to address this problem?
Well, I'm sincerely sorry to hear about your constituent's husband and the terrible diagnosis at stage 4 and the delays in that. We've set out before how difficult the inheritance was in terms of the cancer diagnosis waiting list. People are waiting far too long for treatment. It's why the Chancellor put record money and funding into our NHS so that we can catch cancer on time. And I know that the Health Secretary is determined to do this, and it's a personal endeavour to him to make sure that people are not having to wait and don't end up in the circumstances that are so tragic for your constituent.
Just for the record, I'd like to apologise to Mr Kruger. I got the wrong person. Mr Wilder's now owned up to it. What I would say is don't... What I would say to the honourable member is, don't sit next to him again. Right, that completes Prime Minister's question. Right, we come to the first urgent question. Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department if she will make a statement on police reform.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I start by thanking the Honourable Lady for this urgent question on this very important subject. At its best, policing in England and Wales is truly world-class. Every day, officers perform their duties with courage, skill and dedication, and we are all grateful to all of them. At the heart of our British policing tradition is the notion of policing by consent, which is dependent on maintaining mutual bonds of trust between officers and the local communities they serve. But over the last decade or more, policing has faced a perfect storm. As visible neighbourhood policing has been decimated, as law enforcement has struggled to keep up with fast-changing crimes, as outdated technology has held forces back, and as confidence has fallen in communities and amongst victims, because far too often people feel that if something goes wrong, no one will come and nothing will be done. But for too long, instead of government showing leadership and helping the police to navigate these testing times, predecessors in our department have just walked away. This government will not stand on the sidelines while public confidence and public safety are put at risk. And that's why we're pursuing our unprecedented Safer Streets mission, to reduce the most serious violence and to rebuild confidence in policing and the criminal justice system. Now, to successfully deliver that mission, we need forces that are fit for the challenge of today and tomorrow. That is why the Home Secretary yesterday announced a programme of police reform that will be pursued in partnership with policing. And under our neighbourhood policing guarantee, we will restore patrols to town centres and rebuild the vital link between forces and the people they serve. To drive up performance and standards, a new performance unit will be established in the Home Office, which will use high-quality police data to spot trends, improve performance and consistency. And we will work with policing to create a national centre of policing to bring together crucial support services such as IT, aviation and forensics. We will present a white paper on police reform to Parliament next year. The 25-26 police funding settlement for police forces, including full details on government grant funding and precept, will be set out to Parliament in the normal way before Christmas. But the Home Secretary confirmed in her written statement yesterday that as part of that settlement, direct central government funding for policing next year will increase by £500 million. That's core grant and additional funding for neighbourhood policing, counter-terrorism and the National Crime Agency. Mr Speaker, we are at a critical juncture for policing, and we cannot go on as we have been. So together with the police, we will embark on this roadmap for reform to get back to those precious Peel principles and to rebuild the confidence of our communities in the vital work the police do every day to keep us all safe.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm very grateful to you for granting this urgent question. Yesterday, the Home Secretary announced significant reforms to policing through a written statement, a comprehensive restructuring of policing in England and Wales, which will affect thousands of personnel, create a new performance unit and establish a national centre for policing, surely merits some parliamentary scrutiny and an opportunity for members of this House to question what it means for their constituents. So for my own Hazel Grove constituents, what does it mean for Mellor, the most rural part of my constituency? There was no specific mention of rural crime in the Home Secretary's statement, and so I'd ask the Minister what her plans mean for those tackling crime in our rural communities. What do the plans mean for places like Woodley, a district centre in Hazel Grove, which is seeing far too much antisocial behaviour and shoplifting? And what do the plans mean for places like Offerton, where illegal off-road bikes are causing havoc on our roads? What will the plans do to better encourage the police to work with local partners to tackle this problem that is blighting so many? Any police reform must include addressing the Conservative cuts to police community support officers too, who are so often the face of proper neighbourhood policing. My own Greater Manchester Police Force has seen more than 350 PCSOs cut since 2015. More than anything, we need to ensure that these reforms deliver the proper frontline policing our communities deserve. Years of ineffective resourcing from the previous Conservative government have left our police forces overstretched, under-resourced and unable to focus on the crimes that affect our communities the most. It's no wonder, Mr Speaker, that the vast majority of burglaries are still going unsolved, while 7 out of 10 car thefts last year didn't even have a police officer attend the scene. It is genuinely good to hear that more resources will be committed to neighbourhood policing. But as we saw with the Conservatives' Police Uplift programme, more resources doesn't automatically mean that communities will see the difference. So I would welcome assurances from the Minister on how the government will ensure that officers actually have the time and resources to focus on their communities with more bobbies on the beat. Thank you.
I very much welcome the interest that the Honourable Lady is showing in this area. It's the statement that was laid yesterday, the written ministerial statement, was setting out the direction of travel for this government in terms of police reform. As I said in my response to the Honourable Lady's urgent question, there will be a white paper that will be published in the spring. There will be full consultation with, I'm hoping, parliamentary colleagues, as well as with policing, PCCs, all the key stakeholders. This is about the start of the process, so many of the questions that the Honourable Lady was asking will be part of the consultation and the discussion and the conversations that we want to have next year. But can I reassure her that the Safer Streets mission very much is about the neighbourhood policing guarantee. It's about delivering the 13,000 additional police officers, PCSOs and specials back into our neighbourhoods, reinvigorating that neighbourhood policing model. And I think it's also important to say, the Honourable Lady mentioned antisocial behaviour and shoplifting. These, again, are issues that we will be dealing with and bringing forward legislation, particularly around shop theft. The standalone offence of assaulting a shop worker, the removal of the £200 threshold that the previous government had introduced, which meant there was almost a shoplifter's charter that they could actually steal up to £200 and there'd be no action. We're getting rid of that. We are taking action now, but the broader police reform, we will have that conversation next year. This was about setting out the direction of travel.
John Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, I spent some time on patrol with Telford Police, and Sergeant Alex Webb told me about her frustrations of not being able to get repeat offenders of antisocial behaviour off the streets of our town centres and high streets. Mr. Speaker, when will the government give the police the tools that they need to deal with these issues and get the yobs off our high streets and our town centres?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that question. And of course, this week is Antisocial Behaviour Awareness Week, to actually focus in on the effect that antisocial behaviour can have on individuals and to communities. And my honourable friend is absolutely right. We need to tackle the antisocial behaviour. That's why the neighbourhood policing guarantee, getting those officers back onto the streets, alongside the other measures we'll introduce around keeping our town centres and high streets safe, are so important, and we will be bringing those forward in due course.
Shadow Secretary of State Chris Philp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, firstly, let me welcome the Police Minister to her role, succeeding the job I did in the last government. I genuinely wish her well in the job, and I hope she does succeed in it. It's important for the whole country. I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in thanking the police up and down the country for the work they do keeping us safe. Each morning when they put on the uniform to go to work, they take risks required of few other professions. Mr. Speaker, the police headcount in March of this year hit 149,769. That is a record ever number of police. It's 3,000 higher than the previous record. So my first question is this: will the Police Minister commit to at least maintaining, if not growing, that record police officer number? Secondly, will the Police Minister join me in welcoming the fact that overall crime in the last 7 years, as measured by the Crime Survey of England and Wales, the ONS say that's the best measure for crime trends, has come, including fraud, has come down by 17%. Now, the written statement yesterday, and indeed the Home Secretary's speech to the MPCC yesterday, talked about the importance of technology, something I feel very strongly about, as she knows. Now, in the March budget, the previous Chancellor committed to £230 million of spending on police technology over 4 years, of which this year is the first. About £80 million was due to be spent this year. So will the Honourable Lady confirm that the £80 million for this year is secure, and that she and her colleagues will honour the £230 million commitment over the coming 4 years? Does she also agree that it's important that police spend their time actually investigating crime, not policing thought? So does she agree with me that the guidelines need to be changed so that police only spend time investigating real crimes and only investigate non-crimes where there is a real and imminent risk of criminality? That would be a change of guidelines. Will she make those changes? Finally, regarding this reform programme, we need to see the details, of course, but will she confirm that no money will be taken away from local police forces? Will she confirm that police and crime commissioners and chief constables will continue to be fully empowered? And finally, on the question of police funding, She mentioned some numbers for next year's funding settlement. Now, she will be aware that this current financial year, when I was Police Minister, we arranged a £922 million increase in the funding for frontline policing this year compared to last. The numbers she's talking about in the statement are much lower than that. So will she take this opportunity to commit that any funding increase for frontline policing that she brings forward in the police funding settlement will be at least as big as the one that I announced last year?
Well, I think this is the first opportunity I've had to welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman to his new role as the Shadow Home Secretary. But I do think he might be forgetting a few facts, because if I recall, during the course of the previous 14 years, the Conservative government slashed policing by over 20,000 police officers and many support staff as well. So whilst I acknowledge the Uplift programme was brought in at the end of their period in government, they did get rid of a lot of very experienced and good police officers. And also, just to remind him, we stood on a manifesto commitment of 13,000 additional police officers, PCSOs and specials as part of our neighbourhood policing guarantee. I know the Right Honourable Gentleman is very keen on technology. I think that was one of the things he absolutely focused on, and I've certainly taken up some of the issues that he was concerned about around live facial recognition, and I want to see that investment continue. Can I also just say to him, I think again he's forgetting a few things, because he refers to the non-crime hate incidents and the guidelines. Now, if I recall, he was actually the minister that introduced those guidelines when he was the policing minister. So I listen to what he says, but I do think he just needs to remember what he actually did when he was the policing minister. And I take the approach that this should be an issue that is around common sense and consistency, and that's what the HMIC FRS have said about the need for consistency and for training. So I'm going to listen to what they have to say rather than perhaps his view on what he actually introduced. The other issues he raised, we're going to have a white paper. So many of the questions he's asking will be part of that consultative approach that we will adopt when that white paper is laid before Parliament.
Colton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What my constituents tell me they're worried about, particularly, is anti-social behaviour. And what they say to me is that they want guaranteed police patrols. Can my right honourable friend agree with me that that is what this government is intending to deliver?
Well, I very much welcome that question from my honourable friend and neighbour in Kingston upon Hull. And he's absolutely right that the neighbourhood policing guarantee will include designated police officers, PCSOs and specials who will patrol particular neighbourhood areas. There will be a named officer that people can go to if there are problems around antisocial behaviour. We'll also be bringing forward respect orders, which again will deal with the most persistent people who are engaging in antisocial behaviour and stop them being in particular neighbourhood areas, or even put conditions on them, for example, if they've got an alcohol problem, that they have to get treatment and help for that particular problem. But he's absolutely right, antisocial behaviour is a big issue for many of our constituents.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the government's announcements around neighbourhood policing? This is something that in Staffordshire, under the leadership of the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner Ben Adams and our Chief Constable Chris Noble, we have seen a real move in that direction already. So I very much welcome what the Minister has said. But the NIO, she will know, has previously raised concerns around the experience of officers in neighbourhood policing. What work will she be doing to make sure that officers have the right degree of experience so that they can maximise the announcements that have been made on neighbourhood policing?
Can I also just take this opportunity to welcome the new chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee? And I certainly know it's one of the very best jobs actually in Parliament, chairing that particular committee. As to the issue around neighbourhood policing, and I recognise that there is good practice going on around the country. Certain police forces are doing this very well indeed. But the chair of the Select Committee is absolutely right. We want to equip our neighbourhood police officers with the best training to enable them to do a really good job for their communities. So that's why we've already announced money for the College of Policing to engage and to involve those neighbourhood police officers in the training that they deserve to have, particularly around problem solving. We think this is a really important part of the role that they will play in neighbourhoods.
Lewis Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To deliver effective policing, we need reform, but also to ensure that police officers feel they have our support. Does the Minister agree with me that meeting the recommendations of the pay review body is a key part of delivering that support? And what view does she have for those, including the party opposite, who would prefer to not meet the recommendations of the pay review? And what impact would that have on police morale?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We need to support our police officers in the work that they do to keep us all safe day in, day out. And of course, my honourable friend will know that this year we accepted the recommendations of the pay review body, and additional funding was provided to police forces to pay for that increase in salaries. I think it's really important that we continue to make sure that our police are properly remunerated for the difficult job that they do, and that's exactly what the Home Secretary has made clear in her support for police officers.
Anna Sabine.
Mr. Speaker, farmers in my constituency in Freeman East Somerset tell me that not only are they often the victims of serious rural crime, including threats of physical violence, but that they don't usually bother to report that crime because they don't think our rural police forces are well resourced enough to give a full response. And if that's happening across the country, presumably it means rural crime is being seriously underreported. I wonder if the Minister could tell me what more she plans to do to resource our rural crime teams, but also to give farmers and other people living in rural areas reassurance that they can report crime and that in fact they should do so.
Excellent question. The Honourable Lady is exactly right. We need to make sure that when crime happens, it's reported. That's absolutely vital. And as I said in my opening remarks, I think for too long people feel that it's not worth reporting because no one will come and nothing will be done. Our neighbourhood policing guarantee is not just about urban areas. It also covers rural areas, and we want to see those neighbourhoods in communities, rural communities, have the level of support that they need from policing, PCSOs and specials. I'm also responsible for rural crime, and I know there's a range of issues that we need to look at again, including theft of agricultural machinery. So that's one area that I'm particularly focused on at the moment.
Luke Meyer.
Just last night, Gisborough Town FC in my constituency suffered a break-in and a burglary. I'm grateful to Cleveland Police for responding and for meeting with me this morning to update me on the situation, but there simply aren't enough of them on the streets. Can the Minister give me that assurance that this government will prioritise frontline, visible neighbourhood community policing once again?
Yes, I can, absolutely. And can I also just pay tribute to Cleveland, who have made a great deal of progress in recent times.
Sir Christopher Chill.
Mr. Speaker, will the Minister include references to fraud in her white paper? There's an organisation called Action Fraud, more accurately described as Inaction Fraud, and that is presiding over a complete failure to do anything, particularly about online fraud committed against online retailers. Can we ensure that some action is taken to help those people who are victims of fraud?
I can reassure the right honourable gentleman that the Lord's Minister, the Noble Lord Hanson, is looking at this whole area. And of course, just to gently point out that the inheritance from the previous administration around fraud is one that we are having to deal with and tackle, and some of the problems with action fraud which were not dealt with previously, we are now going to look at.
Alison Newman.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. The latest crime figures show that shoplifting has shot up to a 20-year high, knife crime has risen yet again, and violence against women and girls remains shamefully and persistently high. Does the Minister agree with me that this shows the disgraceful dereliction of the last Tory government on law and order?
I think my honourable friend puts that very well, and that's why we have the Safer Streets mission with our very ambitious aim to halve violence against women and girls over the next decade, to halve knife crime over the next decade, to restore neighbourhood policing and to restore confidence in the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal Democrats have long campaigned for proper neighbourhood policing, so we welcome this announcement. Sadly, I've heard firsthand about the concern and fear from some members of one of my communities in Dartmouth of a police decision to redeploy a local sergeant who had spent a couple of years building really positive relationships and trust with the local community, particularly around antisocial behaviour and drug dealing. So can the Minister clarify how the neighbourhood policing guarantee will be implemented and how the Home Office plans to ensure that communities have consistent and long-term access to a known named officer who will remain in the community?
Can I gently point out that the Liberal Democrats were part of the coalition government, that through those years of austerity that we did see major cuts to police officers, including neighbourhood police officers. But I do take her point now, and that's why we have the neighbourhood policing guarantee. We're having 13,000 additional police officers, PCSOs and specials. We'll have that named police officer that the Honourable Lady was requesting, that people can go to if they have problems in their area. And we want to make sure, as I said earlier, they're properly trained and that this is seen as a very important part of policing and that people want to stay in neighbourhood policing for more time.
Mr. Speaker, constituents of mine in the town of Nantwich often report experiencing unacceptable incidents of antisocial behaviour at night, particularly linked to the nighttime economy. So can I welcome this government's plan to introduce zero-tolerance zones and respect orders to get a grip of the antisocial behaviour which the last government allowed to run out of control? And can she say a little bit more about how that will help my constituents?
Well, I think I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising that particular point, and I think all MPs will know that antisocial behaviour can just blight communities and can cause real problems to individuals and their families. And in fact, as this week is Antisocial Behaviour Awareness Week, I was very struck by the statistic that Resolve came out with, that 1 in 7 householders are thinking of having to move because of antisocial behaviour. That's really shocking. And I think the respect orders that we're introducing, the neighbourhood policing reforms that we will have, will start to address the antisocial behaviour that for too long has blighted many of our communities.
Samuel Wilson. Mr. Speaker. The Minister has outlined the lack of confidence that there is now in the police services across the whole of the United Kingdom because of the failure to deal with real crimes such as burglary, shoplifting, antisocial behaviour, etc. At the same time, we find that 3 police forces have spent a year investigating a tweet by a columnist from someone in Holland. Surely, if there's going to be reform of the police, one of the things we should be doing is telling the police they're no longer the thought police, they're meant to be the police dealing with crime. And if it requires a change in the bad law introduced by the last government, will she make sure that that's done so that we don't have any more of this kind of nonsense?
Well, the honourable gentleman is right in what he's saying about the priorities for this government are those crimes that affect communities and individuals. So the antisocial behaviour that we've been talking about, the threats, the knife-enabled robbery that we've seen an increase in. Those are the things that people care about. These are the things that our Safer Streets mission is designed to deal with. As to the issue which he's referring to around the non-crime hate incidents, I think it's just worth reflecting. The reason we have that is because it came out of the Macpherson inquiry around Stephen Lawrence. And that was about the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And that was about providing an intelligence picture for police officers. It may not be a crime, but it may well be something that the intelligence picture would benefit from knowing about. So I think it's just worth reflecting on that. Of course, I want consistency and common sense in the way that that's dealt with. And as I said earlier on, the Inspectorate have also highlighted the need for consistency and training because of the confusion on the guidelines that were issued by the previous government. So I'm certainly happy to look at that with the College of Policing and to make sure we get this right. But there is a place for it in some circumstances.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Residents living around Wilmot Park in West Dartford continue to be plagued by antisocial behaviour in their park, including vandalism, use of motorbikes in green spaces, noise and threatening behaviour. As part of its Safer Streets mission, will the government use police reform to ensure that these sorts of crimes are prioritised in Dartford and across the country?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for that question? I want the police to be getting on with this now, and there are powers that they can use to deal with antisocial behaviour, but of course we want to make sure they have additional officers through the neighbourhood policing guarantee to ensure that they can deal with the antisocial behaviour in communities. But on the issue of motorbikes, we have been very clear there will be action, there will be additional powers given to the police to make sure that they can seize and destroy those motorbikes and vehicles which are causing nuisance to communities through antisocial behaviour.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Having worked with the Right Honourable Lady on committees over a number of years, I'm delighted to congratulate her on her appointment. And in that spirit, may I make what I think is a helpful suggestion about non-crime hate incidents. Clearly, chief constables have got huge discretion on how much effort they put into investigating local crime and non-crime incidents of the sort that she says have a place in the spectrum. Could she perhaps require chief constables in the future to report back to her department how many hours they spend, their forces spend, on investigating crime incidents and investigating non-crime incidents, because it appears that tens of thousands of non-crime incidents are being investigated every year.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for those comments, and it was a great pleasure to work with him on various committees over the years. The Right Honourable Gentleman is correct. This is an operational matter. It's for Chief Constables to decide how they use the resources available to them. My understanding is that actually very little time is spent on non-crime hate incidents, but I will certainly go back and check that with His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and check that is correct, but that's my understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Coming from a policing family and having served with the National Crime Agency, I'm immensely proud of British policing, but equally devastated at the decline that it was overseen by the opposite party. Can the Minister outline what we're doing to rebuild British policing and returning it to the best police force in the world?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his question and also for his service. And I think we will all benefit from having the honourable gentleman in the House to give his experience and knowledge and to share that with us. I think the police reform agenda that we've set out in the written ministerial statement yesterday and the speech by the Home Secretary is about resetting that relationship with the police. But we want to work with the police. This is not about doing things to the police. It's about working collectively to get the very best police service that we can have for this country, for today and tomorrow and the years ahead.
Richard Tax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My residents in Boston and Skegness want the police on the streets, preventing antisocial behaviour and preventing crime. They don't want our valuable police resources wasted on monitoring tweets for non-crime hate incidents, threatening and bullying residents, and then that record remains on someone's remains on the database and can prevent them getting a job in the future. It's a complete waste of time. Will the Minister and the Home Office just scrap those guidelines as an unnecessary use of valuable time and resources?
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, this government has been very clear about its priorities in terms of policing. We've set out in our Safer Streets mission that we are going to halve violence against women and girls, we're going to halve knife crime over the next decade, we're going to restore the confidence of the public in the criminal justice system, particularly in the police. We're going to introduce neighbourhood policing because we know that's the bedrock of policing in this country. It's the area that most people want to see the investment going into. That's exactly what our priority is. The Prime Minister has said that, the Home Secretary has said that, and I think that's where the focus of the attention of the police needs to be.
Alistair Strathern.
Speaker. Far too many of my towns and villages have for too long had to endure rising levels of antisocial behaviour, rising riding of unsafe dirt bikes through the village centres, and an epidemic of shoplifting, including at my local Morrison's, who I met with last month. I'm working closely with our local Police and Crime Commissioner, John Tizard, to push for more robust police response. But what reassurances can the Minister give my constituents that our new strategy will ensure much more priority is given to these crimes and they aren't simply tolerated, as they have far too often seemed to be in the past?
Can I thank my honourable friend for the work that he's doing on this really important area. And shop theft and attacks on retail workers are something that this government is committed to dealing with. We will be bringing forward legislation in due course. But it's absolutely part of our Safer Streets mission, that focus on high streets and town centres and communities, that people feel safe, that there is a police presence and that antisocial behaviour will not be tolerated.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Week in, week out, police officers from my Twickenham constituency are extracted to go and police protests and events in central London. Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents and I are proud to live in our great capital city and in a democracy where the right to protest is cherished. However, under the Conservatives since 2015, the capital city grant has been cut by 17% in real terms, and that is the money that should be used to police these protests, not community policing resources, which is what the Met Police Commissioner is having to do. So will the Minister review the capital city grant so that my constituents can see a Bobby on the beat again?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, the Honourable Lady will know that the announcements around the police settlement, the provisional police settlement, will be made in December in this House, and the discussions are underway at the moment about exactly the point that the Honourable Lady is raising. I note what she says about the levels of abstraction, and that is a concern. But again, I would say this government is committed to the 13,000 additional police officers, PCSOs and specials in our neighbourhoods, and the Metropolitan Police area will benefit from that, just as every other police area will as well.
Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I spend time canvassing in my constituency, which I do quite often in Harlow, residents tell me they don't see community police officers anymore. Since 2010, when we had over 30 PCSOs for the whole of Harlow, we now have 4. Can the Minister talk to me about how the Safer Streets mission will actually make residents in my constituency of Harlow feel safer?
Can I thank my honourable friend for that question? And it is worth just reflecting on the fact that PCSOs have actually halved in the last 14 years, and specials have been reduced by 2/3. And I think those are quite shocking figures. We want to make sure that we use PCSOs because they are such a valuable way of policing neighbourhoods. And also, I'm personally committed to making sure that we see more specials on the beat, because I think that people who stand up for their local community and do this on a voluntary basis are to be commended, and I hope across the House we would all support an extension of the work of specials.
Ben Obsojecti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Cambridgeshire Constabulary is one of the most poorly funded in the country under the current police allocation formula, which is based on population data from 2012. Cambridgeshire has grown vastly since then and is projected to grow by nearly 20% in the next decade. So in order to fulfil their pledges and ensure that neighbourhood officers aren't overstretched under her plans, will the Policing Minister commit to reviewing the formula before the forthcoming announcement of the 2025-26 police funding settlement so that Cambridgeshire receives its fair share of the 0.5 billion increase? And can she explain how many officers of those 13,000 each force will receive?
Well, the Home Secretary announced yesterday that there will be £500 million additional funding to policing, including the core grant and money for neighbourhood policing that will be for next year. In terms of the announcements for 25-26, the full announcements, they will be made in December in the normal way in this House.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Antisocial behaviour, fly tipping, off-road bikes, e-scooters racing along pavements and the street, and alongside an epidemic of shoplifting are all issues raised time and time again by my constituents across all wards of Portsmouth North. Does the Minister agree that we need police officers back on the beat in local communities, equipped with tougher powers to crack down on these crimes, to not only make the people of Portsmouth feel safer, but to have pride back in our communities?
Yeah.
My honourable friend puts that incredibly well, and that's why we have the Safer Streets mission, and we will have those police officers, PCSOs and specials back in our communities, policing for the vast majority of law-abiding citizens and dealing with the antisocial behaviour that for too long has blighted communities.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 2012, I was run over by a car in the Netherlands, and I woke up in hospital several days later with some fairly severe injuries. I'm thankful that the resulting police investigation was swift and efficient. However, unfortunately, that's not the case in the UK. Forensic collision units across the country are facing severe challenges in preparing cases. That's resulting in large delays to trials and ultimately to justice, prolonging the agony for impacted families. What's the department doing to help the police tackle these resourcing challenges and ensure that those road traffic collision cases come to a swifter conclusion?
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear about the accident that the honourable gentleman suffered in 2012, and I hope that he's made a very full recovery. As to the particular point, I'm going to go away and ask my officials about that and what more we can do to ensure that justice is done when there's road collisions and that cases go to court quickly.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm often contacted by businesses across Gateshead Central and Wickham complaining about high street crime. A recent spate of crimes on Lowfell High Street has left some businesses potentially having to close. With shop thefts up 40% in the past year alone, what will these very welcome measures do to lower crime on our high streets?
My honourable friend makes a really important point, and of course high streets are the lifeblood of our local communities, and we want to make sure that they are as safe as possible, that businesses are not suffering losses through shop theft and assaults on their workers. So I think the package that we've got around dealing with antisocial behaviour, the neighbourhood policing guarantee, the new prosecutions which will come forward when we bring in legislation around retail assaults on retail workers, and getting rid of that £200 threshold for cases to go forward for shop theft. A package. We're not going to do one thing that's going to solve the problem, but we are going to make sure there's a whole package around the high street, neighbourhoods and communities to make them safer and for businesses to thrive, because we need them to do that, because we need them to pay their taxes so we can then invest back into public services.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 2 years ago, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner said that 3,000 officers were not deployable for reasons of physical fitness, and 500 were not deployable for reasons of misconduct allegations. That's more than 10% of the headcount of the Met. So can she tell us what the latest numbers are and whether she plans to make it easier for chief constables to fire underperforming officers as they've requested?
I can write to the honourable gentleman with the figures, but clearly the Metropolitan Police over the last 14 years, there have been issues, and I know the current Commissioner has raised concerns about the procedures for getting rid of police officers. So if the Honourable Gentleman doesn't mind, I've been the policing minister for 5 months. That compares to 14 years that his side were responsible for policing. And I didn't see any action then on dealing with the issues that he's raising with me. Now, I can guarantee that this government will be looking at the workforce, will be making sure that we recruit the right people into policing and we vet police officers throughout their career. Because of the shocking cases that we've seen, David Carrick and others, we are going to take action. We set that out in our manifesto in terms of having a workforce that's fit for purpose. And I have to say to the Honourable Gentleman, I know he's very new in this place, but he does need to remember the legacy that his government, his party, delivered to us when we arrived in July.
Mark Seward.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whenever I speak with residents in my constituency, whenever I speak with business leaders or their staff, they're all telling me the same thing. Whether it's the staff at Wortley Asda who are having to deal with persistent shoplifting, or if it's the stall holders at Morley Market who tell me that they're having to deal with crime in Morley on the High Street, they all tell me that police don't turn up and that they never see police patrols in our communities anymore. So will the Minister confirm today that we are going to return to neighbourhood policing, that we will see police on our streets patrolling again, and that we will have named police officers turn up when things go wrong?
Yeah.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. That's the experience many members of Parliament will find when they talk to their constituents, that they feel there's no point in reporting things because nothing will happen, no one will come. And that's why the neighbourhood policing guarantee is so important. We will have those police officers, PCSOs and specials back on our streets. The visible presence will be there. So I can absolutely say that's part of our Safer Streets mission, and that's what we will deliver.
Tessa Munt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I associate myself with the comments that were made by the Honourable Member for Hazel Grove and Freeman East Somerset, particularly in relation to things like rural crime, car racing, bike racing, threatening behaviour, burglary and shoplifting, and the frustration that people feel with the delays and lack of response and not using things like camera footage that are taken forward on every day. That frustration is nonetheless absolutely dwarfed by the fact that the figures that are apparent to us for the previous Avon and Somerset Police and Crime Commissioner. He had 28.5 full-time equivalent members of staff and a budget that was massive. My constituents have no idea how that is justified when what they want are police officers. Could she make sure that her review actually includes getting a grip on what's happening in the PCC offices, please?
Well, the Honourable Lady will have an opportunity when the White Paper is published to make her and her constituents' views clear. And clearly there will be questions around the different roles, the Home Secretary's role, the PCC role, the operational independence that Chief Constables have. So that will be part of the discussion and the debate around how we take forward the White Paper and the recommendations that come out of it.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and also thank the Speaker for granting this urgent question, which is on the minds of so many of my constituents. Stalking is a form of psychological violence that remains severely underreported. I've met constituents who are victims of stalking, and they've shared with me the lack of the support they feel they're receiving from the Metropolitan Police. They live in constant terror and anxiety, even after taking the brave step of reporting these offences. Can the Minister outline what steps her department is taking to work with the Metropolitan Police to ensure officers receive proper training to identify stalking, support and protect victims and take robust action against perpetrators?
I welcome the question from the Honourable Gentleman, and I am really concerned to hear what he's saying. The Minister for Safeguarding is dealing with the issue of stalking. I know she feels very strongly about this. So I think it might be helpful if the Honourable Gentleman could write to the Minister for Safeguarding. I'll certainly raise this with her myself, because it may be those experiences we need to feed in to make sure that the Metropolitan Police are doing everything they need to support support victims of stalking who bravely come forward.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, it's always a pleasure to see the Honourable Lady from the back benches to the front bench and doing equally good in relation. So I very much welcome the Safer Streets programme and enhancement of community policing. Can the Minister outline how this drive can be a UK-wide drive, a change and address the money lending and drug warfare that blights all of our communities throughout the United Kingdom? I'm thinking very much of paramilitary groups in Northern Ireland, criminal gangs in the UK mainland who work together, share their criminal activities. And so within the police reform, Minister, what opportunity will there be to discuss how better we can work alongside in relation to the Police and Justice Minister in Northern Ireland and the PSNI? We can do better together. Thank you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be questioned by the honourable member, and I just wanted to say to him that when I chaired the Home Affairs Select Committee, we did a report on drugs, and we went to Belfast to look at drug problems in Belfast and in Northern Ireland, and I was very struck by the particular issues there around the involvement of paramilitaries. And so I think it would be really helpful if the honourable gentleman and myself could have a conversation about what more we can do on that particular issue when we're looking at the broader Safer Streets mission.
That concludes that urgent question. We now move on to the second urgent question, and I'll just give a few seconds for the front benches to adjust. Question, Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you for granting this urgent question. My constituents had the devastating news that the Roman Way Hotel in my... on the urgent question on asylum seeker hotels.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This government inherited an asylum system under unprecedented strain, with many thousands stuck in a backlog without their asylum claims processed. The Home Secretary has taken immediate action to restart asylum processing and scrap the unworkable Rwanda policy, which will save an estimated £4 billion for the taxpayer over the next 2 years. We remain absolutely committed to ending the use of hotels for asylum seekers and continue to identify a range of accommodation options to minimise the use of hotels and ensure better use of public money, whilst maintaining sufficient accommodation to meet demand. In accordance with the Immigration and Asylum Act 1999, the Home Office has a statutory obligation to provide destitute asylum seekers with accommodation and subsistence report, whilst their application for asylum is being considered. We're committed to ensuring that destitute asylum seekers are housed in safe, secure and suitable accommodation, and that they're treated with dignity while their asylum claim is considered. We continue to work closely with local authorities and key stakeholders, building on lessons learned in terms of asylum accommodation, stand-up and management. Hotels are not a permanent solution, but a necessary temporary step in keeping the system under control and ensuring it does not descend into chaos. We will restore order to the asylum system so it operates swiftly, firmly and fairly. As we progress with this, it's right that we deliver on our legal responsibilities and ensure people aren't left destitute. Ultimately, Madam Deputy Speaker, we'll be able to tackle irregular migration and bring the cost of the system down by billions of pounds. It remains our ambition to exit hotels. However, in the nearest future, they remain key to delivering on our legal responsibilities and ensuring people aren't left destitute.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I just record my appreciation for getting this urgent question. My constituents had the devastating news that the Roman Way Hotel in my constituency was going to be stood up to be housing asylum seekers. This was after it had been closed last year. This has a significant impact, not just on my constituents, but also in Cannock as well. And of course, what we have seen so far this year and since the party opposite came to power is 19,326 people who've crossed the channel since the party opposite came into power. And this is 19% up on the same period last year. And this is all in the context of a pledge by the party opposite in the manifesto in July to end asylum hotels. So you can imagine the devastation that so many constituents and constituents across the country are feeling when they're seeing hotels being brought back into use, breaking a manifesto pledge from the party opposite. And it is a total lack of transparency. There isn't consultation with local authorities. It's a diktat that they receive with no support and no help. And it's only been exposed by news organisations such as GB News that are shining a light onto this. So will the Minister provide a list to the House of Commons detailing all the hotels that have been stepped up to provide accommodation for asylum seekers since they came to power, and will they commit to continuing to update that list? What is the estimated cost of reopening these hotels? What has changed so drastically that has caused the Labour Party to abandon a manifesto pledge so quickly? Considering that there is a correlation between the removal of the deterrent effect that our party had in place and a rise in crossings, what will the government do to provide a credible deterrent going forward? And finally, will the Minister commit to cease using the Roman Way Hotel in my constituency? And will she also commit to not putting the Hatherton House Hotel in Penkridge into use?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We inherited, as the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, because he was a senior member of the last few administrations, an asylum system that had been ground to a standstill by the last government's pursuit of the Rwanda policy, which was doomed to failure. They spent £700 million over 2 years to send 4 volunteers to Rwanda. He may, and members of the party opposite do claim that the Rwanda scheme was somehow a deterrent, but from when the day it was announced to the day it was scrapped, 83,500 people crossed the channel in small boats. If that's the definition of a deterrent, then I think the Honourable Gentleman needs to look it up in the dictionary. He asks. Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman.